The Supreme Court just told the president no. Not Congress, not voters, the court. And that one word no just changed how much power the executive branch actually has. This isn't about tariffs. It's about who holds the final word in American government. And right now, that answer is shifting. The Trump administration moved aggressively on tariffs, sweeping measures targeting imports from dozens of countries, some framed as national security tools, others under emergency economic authority. The goal was leverage over trade partners, over domestic manufacturers, over the global supply chain. Then the Supreme Court stepped in. Not once, multiple rulings, blocking key provisions, halting implementation, sending policies back, or simply ending them. In weeks, a major piece of the administration's economic agenda was placed on hold not by Congress, not by voters, but by the judiciary. The headline is about tariffs, but the real story is about power. Who decides when a president has gone too far? And what happens when the courts become the final check on executive authority? That's what this is actually about. To understand what happened, you need to understand why presidents reach for tariff authority in the first place. Congress controls trade policy. That's in the Constitution. But over decades, lawmakers passed statutes that delegated significant tariff power to the executive. The idea was flexibility. Presidents needed to respond quickly to changing conditions, currency manipulation, national security threats, sudden economic shifts. Congress couldn't always move fast enough. So they handed the president tools. The Trade Expansion Act, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, Section 232, Section 301. These aren't obscure legal footnotes. They became the main instruments through which modern presidents shaped trade. The Trump administration used them broadly enough that challengers argued the administration had gone past what Congress actually authorized, that the emergency justifications were stretched, that the scope exceeded the statutory limits. The courts agreed. What changed immediately was concrete. Certain tariff schedules were suspended. Importers who had been paying elevated duties faced uncertainty about refunds and future rates. Trading partners who had been in negotiations suddenly had less pressure on them, and businesses that had restructured supply chains around the new tariff environment were left in a difficult position. But here's what the headline didn't capture. The real shift wasn't the blocked tariffs. It was what the court signaled about the limits of delegated authority and what that means for every executive action that relies on the same legal logic. Think of power as a flow. It moves, it concentrates, it disperses. For roughly the last century, power has been flowing toward the executive branch, not in a straight line, and not without resistance, but the trend is clear. The presidency accumulated tools, emergency authority, agency discretion, executive orders that gave it the ability to act where Congress was slow or deadlocked. The judiciary accepted most of this. Courts were generally deferential to executive agencies when it came to interpreting their own enabling statutes. That deference had a name, Chevron. And for 40 years, it meant agencies, and by extension, the president had significant latitude to fill in the gaps Congress left behind. The Supreme Court ended that deference last decade. Now, with these tariff rulings, the court is applying similar skepticism to broad statutory delegations. The logic is this: Congress cannot hand the executive a blank check. When statutes grant sweeping authority with few constraints, courts will look harder at whether Congress actually intended that scope or whether the president has simply claimed it. This moves power, clearly and directly. It moves it away from the executive, at least on the margin. It moves it toward courts, which now serve as a more active check on how presidents use delegated authority. And it creates pressure on Congress theoretically to be more specific if it wants the executive to have certain tools. Whether Congress responds to that pressure is a different question. But the balance has shifted. This is part of a larger pattern. We have seen this dynamic before, in different forms. After Truman tried to seize steel mills during the Korean War, the Supreme Court told him no. After Nixon impounded funds Congress had appropriated, the courts and Congress pushed back. After Bush-era surveillance programs came to light, the judiciary began constraining executive reach in national security. Each time, a president tests the outer edge of executive authority. Each time, the courts draw a line, and each time, The line drawn changes the operating environment for every future president. What's different now is the broader legal context. The court has been consistently skeptical of large, consequential executive actions that rest on vague or broadly interpreted statutes. The major questions doctrine, which says courts won't assume Congress intended to grant transformative authority without saying so, clearly has become a real constraint. It's not just rhetoric. It's being applied. That matters because much of modern executive power rests on exactly the kind of broad statutory language the court is now treating with suspicion. Trade authority, emergency declarations, agency rulemaking, all of it potentially subject to closer scrutiny than it was a decade ago. The tariff rulings aren't an isolated event. They're a data point in a longer trend toward judicial expansion of the checking function. So what happens next? The immediate question is how the administration responds. There are options. Some tariff measures can be reframed under different statutory authority. Some can be scaled back to fit within what the court has said is permissible. Some will likely go back to Congress for more explicit authorization, though whether Congress acts is uncertain. There's also the question of how trading partners respond. When courts constrain a president's leverage, foreign governments take note. Negotiations that were proceeding under the assumption that tariffs were a durable tool now have a different calculus. The legal instability around U.S. trade policy becomes itself a factor that other countries weigh. For businesses, the uncertainty is costly in its own right. Companies that made sourcing decisions, capital investments, or pricing strategies based on the tariff environment now face ambiguity. Even if new measures eventually replace the blocked ones, the gap creates real friction. But the longer-term consequence is more fundamental. If courts continue applying this level of scrutiny to executive authority across trade, energy, immigration, financial regulation, future presidents will face a different operating environment than their predecessors did. The tools will still exist. The statutes will still be there. But the legal risk of reaching far will be higher. Future administrations, regardless of party, will need to either work more carefully within tighter statutory boundaries or invest more effort in getting Congress to explicitly authorize what they want to do. Neither is simple. Congress is slow, and tight statutory boundaries reduce flexibility. This could push power in one of two directions. More toward Congress if lawmakers seize the moment and reclaim their role in areas they've long delegated, or more toward courts if the judiciary continues to be the decisive voice on where executive authority ends. If this pattern continues, the balance of authority could look very different within a few election cycles. There's one more dimension worth understanding. The confrontation between the executive and the judiciary doesn't happen in isolation. It shapes how other institutions calculate their own leverage. Congress has generally been comfortable allowing presidents to act unilaterally. Lawmakers get the benefit of outcomes without the political cost of votes. When courts step in to block those actions, it forces a question. Does Congress want to reclaim authority, or does it prefer to remain on the sidelines? In recent decades, Congress has mostly chosen the sidelines. Trade is a good example. Lawmakers delegated tariff power and then largely watched as presidents used it however they chose. The court's rulings now create a moment where Congress could step back in by writing narrower statutes or by explicitly authorizing or prohibiting specific measures. Whether it does is about politics, not law. States, meanwhile, have limited ability to directly counter federal trade policy, but some have filed challenges. Some have passed laws trying to insulate local economies from the effects of federal trade decisions. The results are mixed. Federal supremacy in trade is well established. But state pressure, combined with judicial scrutiny, adds to the overall friction around executive action. None of this resolves cleanly. That's the nature of constitutional conflict in a system designed with competing centers of power. So return to the original question. Who has the final word? The honest answer is, it depends on where you are in the process. The president acts. Congress can respond if it chooses to. Courts review, and increasingly, they're willing to say no. What the 2026 tariff rulings added to that picture is a clearer signal that executive reach has limits the judiciary is prepared to enforce. That's not new in principle. But the frequency and scope of judicial pushback is notable. The court is not simply deferring to the executive on questions of major economic or policy significance. This may not dominate headlines for long. The news moves quickly, and the next confrontation will draw attention away from this one. But shifts like this quietly redefine who holds the final word in American government, not through a single dramatic ruling, through accumulation, through precedent building on precedent. The balance of power in the United States doesn't shift in dramatic ruptures. It shifts in the quiet accumulation of decisions like these, each one moving the line slightly, each one changing the operating environment for whoever holds power next. That's what happened here, and that's what's worth watching.